Welcome to the first post-vice presidential debate edition of Red Meat. I'm Jim Geraghty, along with Mark Hemingway, and our special guest, Eli Lake. You know his fine reporting from the, sad to say, late New York Sun, and I'm certain it'll be coming to a fine publication near you in the near future. Gentlemen, we just got to watch, I think, a very entertaining hour and a half between Sarah Palin and Joe Biden. I definitely have my assessment of my refuting my previous Eeyore-like demeanor going into this, but nonetheless, I want to start with you guys. Mark, your take coming out of this.
Well, I have to admit that I think the Democrats actually did themselves a disservice by cutting down Palin as much as they did. I mean, the fact of the matter is if she came out there and didn't dribble cerebral spinal fluid out the corner of her mouth, then she was going to do pretty well in this debate. And I think she exceeded expectations in terms of, polls showing that, they didn't feel she was ready to lead and things like that. I mean, I think that this is going to roll back a lot of this. Was it a game changer? No, but I mean, I do think that, certainly it could reinforce the image of her readiness, and certainly it could be worth, a bump in the polls.
Okay, Eli, you're a very big foreign policy guy. What was your overall take on the debate? And I'm very curious about your take on the foreign policy sections.
I think Mark was right that she exceeded expectations, and I think when she steered the conversation or the debate back to energy policy and actually foreign policy, or what I'd say, appealing to victory voters, she's great and she's coherent and she makes a lot of sense and she does sound like someone ready for that national stage. When the questions were about predatory lenders and the economy and things like that, she was, I think, less so, and I think sometimes she came off as a little bit too formulaic when attacking, sort of the standard vote about against the troops in the field while they were there. I mean, that was a debate about timelines. It really wasn't a question about whether they supported, funding the army in the field at the time.
Now, as I said, last edition of Red Meat, I was out on the ledge. I was buying stock in razor blade companies, preparing the hemlock cocktail, just expecting the absolute worst. And I guess my fear was that Palin was going to come across nice, likable, but not necessarily sharp and competent, and the kind of person you believe could be, heaven forbid, commander-in-chief as early as February 2009. I think she made a huge stride in that direction. I think she really came across as somebody with a much broader range of knowledge. And I think what's great is that she made her points in a very natural, conversational way. I think she didn't lose any of that natural good neighbor you'd like to have living next door quality about her. So I think that was great. I think my assessment is that it was in the neighborhood of a tie. And considering the expectations, but also look, Sarah Palin has not been on the national stage. Joe Biden's been there forever.
36 years.
She wasn't supposed to be able to hold her own.
I think in the event of a tie, I mean, the victory has to go to Palin, certainly, in that regard. And I think the one thing that also has to be said about the debate, I mean, we're all focused on Palin's performance, but the fact of the matter is Joe Biden did a couple things that were jaw-droppingly awful. You can give him points on a few things here and there, but I mean, his answer on Afghanistan, I mean,
Let's talk about that.
Please, Eli, talk about that.
Okay, well, Palin makes a gaffe. She calls General McKiernan General McClellan. Okay.
You got a bunch of letters right.
Okay, right. She got the syllables right. Biden makes an enormous gaffe because he brings up General McKiernan and says he doesn't think a surge is going to work, and then then acknowledges in the second part of the rebuttal that Obama's called essentially for a surge in Afghanistan. Now, furthermore, McKiernan's boss, General David Petraeus, he thinks a surge might work, or at least the counterinsurgency strategies that were developed in Iraq. Yeah. And I don't think McKiernan himself is going to go out on a limb if he's asked again about this. I don't think it says what Biden thought it said, and I think he came off very shaky if you look at the substance behind what his answer was.
And the fact of the matter is, this was one of the few points in the night where she rightly stepped up and called him on something.
Yeah.
And she was right about it. And there were a couple of other moments there, and I just thought in the debate where, he was condescending in his usual, long-winded self. That part about, the Constitution, demanding, gay marriage or whatever he was trying to say. I mean, look, don't get me wrong. I mean, I think, you can argue in terms of civil unions and other things like that, and certainly they were on agreement on that issue, but just the way he phrased it was just terrible.
But if I could say on civil unions issue, Sarah Palin, who is the most popular figure in the American conservative movement as well as the Republican Party probably right now, gave an answer on civil unions that respected legal equality and equality under the law for civil unions, it sounded like to me. That's a pretty big step, and I would be very interested to kind of get a reaction from social conservatives and focus on the family Sarah Palin's answer.
Yeah.
Well, she's a crazy fundamentalist, right? So, she clearly can't,
Yeah.
But no, you bring up a good point there. And one thing I think where she really scored in this debate was that on, for better or for worse, some conservatives may not like this, when you start talking about, cap and trade, global warming, gay marriage, and things, she came off as very, very moderate. And for someone we've been told is, this fire-breathing, religious crazy from somewhere outside, somewhere north of the United States, she really did a lot to soften her image.
Yeah. Of note, going back to Afghanistan for one point, Joe Biden said we spent more in Iraq in 1 month than we have in Afghanistan in 6 or 7 years. My early estimate is that he's off by a neighborhood of about 2,000%. Between this and when he starts talking about things that didn't happen, like being forced down on the superhighway of terror, being shot in Iraq, the meeting in Tehran that U.S. diplomats...
Right.
Look, this I have been saying for a long time, and it's long overdue. America needs drug testing of its presidential tickets. And I want to see Joe Biden pee in a cup because, frankly, it would explain the hallucinations.
Well, he needed to go on television like Abraham Lincoln in 1929.
Exactly, yes.
On the internet, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So anyway, takeaway, guys. Just kind of, maybe 1 or 2 sentences. What do we remember from
about
tonight?
like spending in 1 month, that can't possibly be right. And by the way, it's anyone who's going to tell you that they know how to measure this, it's very tricky.
Yeah.
Because there's the standard cost for everything to keep the Army in the size that it is, and then, what are we paying in deployment, and how that, there are people who have, spend all year on this one question, and they still don't give a straight answer.
Mark?
I think the bottom line about the night is that whatever Palin's mistakes were, her circular sentences and things that are sort of hard to follow, and other things there that maybe aren't cutting edge retail politics. The fact of the matter is her mistakes weren't anywhere near in the same league as Joe Biden's mistakes, and that's what I think people are going to take away. And she even had a few very, very strong answers. And I know, and I hate to say this, and I'm going to bring this up here, and I'm going to inject gender into the debate here. My wife, who I remember watching the Charlie Gibson debate, and I remember shrugging my shoulders and going, of course she got an unfair deal, whatever. My wife was livid about the condescension. And after my wife said that, I since talked to every woman I know. And just about every woman, even whether or not they liked Palin or not, was angry about Gibson's condescension. And I think that, my wife felt very good from a female perspective about the way that Palin performed. And I will be really interested to see how this gender gap plays out into the election dynamics. It's had a big impact so far.
Right, definitely something to watch. My kind of takeaway from the evening is, look, the McCain campaign is swimming upstream. They're in a rough spot right now. Tough road to hoe for the next couple of weeks before Election Day. Sarah Palin is a rising star on the Republican scene, one of the brightest rising stars. Tonight, she kept herself in the game. If she's interested in national office in 2012, nothing she said tonight is going to be held against her.
Yep.
And I think this kind of gives her a little bit of staying power, too, because you had that series of, very rough interviews with television news, and then she goes back to a debate form, which is supposed to be tougher than sit down, interviews one-on-one with anchors, and she did much better than the expectations.
But also there was no filter this time. I mean, the way we saw some of the creative editing with ABC and some other things.
Anyway, so that seems to be the mood here tonight. Very impressive night for Sarah Palin. Joe Biden, we hope he gets the mental health assistance he needs. Otherwise, we have a couple more debates to look forward to. We hope we'll be giving you pre-reaction, post-reaction, and everything in between here on Red Meat. Thanks very much for watching.